Hello, and welcome to another fine episode of the Reinforce the Horse podcast. I am glad you're here and listening. Today, I am flying solo as Alyssa is back at home, and I have taken a short little sabbatical trip, if you will, to San Diego to attend a yoga training course, and that's going on for a couple days. And so I thought I would record a bit about that and talk about it and how the horses have ultimately kind of guided me in this direction over the past 4 years or so. It's been quite remarkable. So I don't know how much the vast majority of people know about yoga, but it seems in our culture here in America, it is more about body movement and doing different movements with your body. That's what comes to mind for me anyways. In the past, when I would think about yoga, I thought it as a fitness regime, strictly around body movement. I really had no idea that it entailed much more than that. And I didn't understand at all that it had to do with ancient practices, even predating, say, the religions or philosophies of Buddhism and Hinduism. So the way I understand it, yoga practices even predates those philosophies, and then those were more or less a branch off of ancient yoga practices. At any rate, I found yoga to be very, very beneficial in my life, and I haven't really even gotten to the body movements yet. My only experience with body movement in yoga really comes from very limited things that I learned in like beach body videos a decade ago. And I really didn't have any formal training on any sort of body movement practices of yoga. However, not long ago, my partner, Selena, and we went through a program called Inner Engineering. It's by a yogi guru named Sadhguru. And he basically takes you through a process of, I don't even really know how to explain it other than you re-engineer yourself from the inside out. And it doesn't have any body movement associated with it. There's some other yoga practices, primarily meditation and chanting, that goes on during the 7-day course. And we took the online course, and it's just delivered by him. You'd spend 90 minutes a day for 7 days, pretty much just going through the instruction. He encourages you not to take any notes or anything like that. And you just kind of meditate on it. And the way he describes it is that regardless of belief system or religion or whatever you practice in life, that the teaching really provides an avenue for you to understand and better utilize the technology of our body and mind. And it really was life-changing for me. I grew up in a primarily Christian household, and by primarily I mean, and Christian to me is a very broad subject, especially modern Christianity. So I grew up going to various churches of different denominations and belief systems. And I remember in the 90s when the idea of yoga or meditation or anything like that would come up, it was always shunned or looked down upon from the teachings in the Christian church. And I know I've read the Christian Bible a good amount and spent a good amount of time in my late teen years and such, really going into detail on that. And so I know some of the references, say, like back in the Old Testament in Deuteronomy and such, where some of these practices are alluded to in that text as being abominable in God's eyes. And back in those days, going through those teachings as a young adult, it never really sat right with me, because the people that I did meet, even back in that time in my life, who were engaged in yoga or some other types of uh, belief systems, say Buddhism or even Hinduism, I always had a feeling that they just felt better than most Christians that I came in contact with, for the most part. Not all, but I still remember when I was really young, back in like fourth grade, there was this girl who used to wait at the bus stop with me to go to school. And one day, I don't know how it came up, but she said that she was Buddhist and her mom were there. And I just remember them having like a really calm and peaceful and loving aura about them. And to this day, they still stick in my mind. And I never really interacted with them other than at the bus stop, but I just remember that. And over the years in my life, what I've found to be the case in a lot of Christian beliefs and the way people go about going to church and coming home and forgetting about what they learn in that building for a week and go back and reset, it just always seemed to me that there was a part missing. And so what I'm getting at, when I started working with horses, I started restructuring my spirit. Well, in fact, I started the restructuring internally long before I started working with horses. I would say circa 2014, I went through a divorce, and divorce is pretty chaotic and hectic for most people. And I remember turning inward at that point and really feeling left like there was nothing, like I was starting from scratch. And so I did deep dive back into biblical context back then. And it just didn't resonate. And so a little later, I'm going to talk about resonance and how that's become really apparent in my working with the horses. But Christianity at the time it just wasn't resonating. Going to church, talking to people, and there was something like a stigma, whether I brought that on myself, feeling salient, if you will, about divorce and just everything around that. I just couldn't find a place. So I wound up having a guest on a podcast that I was hosting back then. It was called Get Fit Friday. It didn't last very long, but looking back on it, the guests that I had were amazing, and I really wish I would have kept going with that idea. At any rate, I had a guest, I think she was one of my first guests. Her name is Trisha Devney, and she's in Tucson, and she's essentially a sound healer. And I remember having her on my show, and I had a little studio in one of my spare bedrooms in the house I was living in at the time. And we sat face to face, and she began to explain how through the process of sound, she healed from a chronic medical condition. And to be honest, at the time, I thought she was off her rocker. I thought she was crazy. um, but she left me after the interview with a 2 minute sample of the crystal bowl resonant sound recordings that she does. And I remember right after she left, I went down, laid on my bed, and I just put some headphones in and listened to that 2 minute sound while I breathed. And at the time, I didn't even know how to breathe. But I remember coming out of that 2 minutes feeling like I had an immense upgrade in my being. Primarily, my brain felt upgraded. It felt like it had a super good night's sleep in just 2 minutes, and I felt really good. So that kind of piqued an interest in me. So I continued to do that 2 minute audio listening routine, not really knowing anything about what I was doing other than what Trisha shared with me in the podcast interview. And then not long after that, the app Headspace came along, and I think it was just debuting. I could be wrong on that, but Headspace, I think, was just starting out at that time. And I wound up going through a trial of it, and that started me on the path of meditation. And Headspace was fantastic because it gave me a platform and structure. And this was at a really, really dark time in my life. I really didn't want anything to do with people. I didn't really want anything to do with myself. I'll expand on that in a moment. But at the time, I felt horrible. I can't say I was suicidal, but I probably had times, or definitely had times, where I didn't want to be on this earth anymore. So call it what you will, but it was just a really, really dark, difficult time for me. And I found a good amount of peace and tranquility, if you will, within the meditative environment. And I was just an infant in that sort of being, and really just relied on Headspace to kind of guide and take me through that. Now, the changes in me weren't drastic, really. I mean, I still was struggling with a lot. I still had a lot of internal work to do, but I felt better. And feeling better when you're going through very dark periods of your life, just feeling a little bit better is like putting one little step in front of the other. And that's what I did. And I suppose a good sort of 6 months or so went by of just doing that. And I started reading more books and starting to, or I started to open up more in my line of thinking and my belief systems, and really started challenging my belief systems at that time and wondering, are the belief systems that I have within me, are they true to myself? Are they true to what I'm supposed to be here for? Now, I wasn't asking those questions very well back then, but the seeds were planted for those questions, I suppose you can say. So, yeah, I didn't know anything about yoga for a while. I think I got really into physical fitness as I started meditation. I remember reading a book by Hal Elrod um, called The Miracle Morning. And that book changed my life in so many ways. I started journaling every day. I was doing exercise every day, physical exercise. I had a mantra that I created that helped me in visualization process. And so he goes through and explains basically how to get out of the funk of your life. A short bit on his story. He was a really prominent salesperson for the Cutco knife company, and he wound up having a car accident where I think he almost died, and he rebounded from that and ultimately wound up becoming a different person and writing this book. So in his book, he created an acronym called SAVOR, and I'm just going off of memory here, so I might have memory serves me right. It's just savor and not plural with an S at the end. But the acronym S would be for scripting, aka writing, so it fits the acronym. A is affirmation. V is visualization. E is exercise. And R is reading. And so in his book, he goes into much more detail, but basically, if you do those things every single day, his idea is, and really it's not an idea, it's a law, I think, that your life will change for the better. And so I applied that for a good amount of time. And naturally, as human beings, I think we get into things that can become habit, and then over time, as we grow and mature, maybe we have to move on to a different way of expressing them. But I did that for months, if not over a year or so, and also coupled with the headspace meditation at the time. And I remember feeling so much better, but still having this blank hole, if you will, or black hole within me, which I later came to find, and actually it was just recently that and I'm 41 years old now, and it seems for like 41 years, I have had a certain amount of hatred for myself. Um, And I've heard it said, and it sounded so cliche that, you can't love others until you love yourself. And so I would kind of work through that, over the course of my life and say, well, I really love this person. So therefore, I have to love myself somehow. But the truth of it is that I didn't love myself. And the love that I thought I was pouring out to people certainly wasn't coming across to them in the way that I thought that it should or was. And that caused me a lot of problems, not only with me internally, but also with my relationships, be it with my first wife, or my parents, or my siblings, or my children. So, and really other people that I just came in contact with. It always felt like I had this dark cloud of negativity over me, no matter how hard or how much I desired to show love and gratitude and appreciation to other people. And so while this Savor acronym really helped me and Headspace meditation really helped me, it was really just the first part. And I like to think of the way that life goes, that if you think of an onion, and an onion peel is very, very thin, but it seems like each one of these huge things or transformations that we come across really only scratches at just a wee little bit of one layer of the onion skin. And so while at least a couple years went by of practicing this, and I did feel better, and uh I wound up taking the kids, Jacob and Alyssa. They're my biological children, and Jacob is now 15, almost 15 and a half, and Alyssa is almost 18. She's 17 and a half almost. So at the time, this was back in, let's see, 2016 or so, we took a trip all around the country and decided to just road trip it and visit some friends and family along the way, and we had a blast doing that. Uh, and so I went through all of these like personal changes and I started feeling better, but I wasn't healing yet. Maybe the very basic or thin pieces of the onion skin layer of healing was going on, but nothing super profound. And not getting to a point where I felt healed. I remember, or if I look back on it now, I can see where I started getting discouraged with that process. And so a lot of my, like the savor method that I learned from Hal Elrod's book and even Headspace, I started kind of just tapering off a bit and not being as diligent in the practice of it. And so around 2017, or in late 2017, I was actually diagnosed with a rather rare form of cancer for my age. It's actually a pretty common cancer, but it's a rare form for my age. It's called chronic lymphocytic leukemia, or CLL. And my doctor at the time said, you probably have about 5 to 10 years before treatment will be necessary. Nonetheless, it was a cancer diagnosis. And as you probably are well aware, either about yourself or somebody that has had a cancer diagnosis and how devastating that can be. And I would like to say that it wasn't devastating for me, but it was incredibly devastating. And I didn't realize how devastating it was until, shoot, not recently, or recently rather. So I feel like at the time of that diagnosis, I had such a good thing going in life. I mean, I was probably in the best physical shape that I had ever been. I was doing things that I enjoyed. I felt like my ability to love and be loved was increasing. But ultimately, I just kind of let that devastation hit me without really knowing it. And I would say just a few months before that, not long before that, I met my current life partner. Her name's Selena. And we hit it off really well from the very beginning. And I remember telling her about the cancer diagnosis, and I was just like, if you want to call it quits with me, now's probably the time to do it. And looking back even on that statement, I was etching into stone that my life was over and that there was really no reason to continue on. And I did continue on, of course. I didn't want to die necessarily, and I wasn't suicidal or anything like that. But internally, I just really felt horrible. And I've come to find out that really didn't have so much to do with the cancer. The cancer diagnosis was merely just a catalyst for me to begin to open up a little bit more to these types of things. And so the term healing has always been something that I've been really intrigued by. And interestingly enough, my name Jason, in fact, actually stems from the Hebrew language and it means healer, um, which I've always kind of felt an ability, not an ability, I don't even like to say the word ability, but I felt a tilt, if you will, toward to the idea that healing is possible, be it spiritual, emotional, physical, all of those things. I have always felt there to be an ability to carry out healing in one's life. Now, the definition that the dictionary gives us for healing is the process of making or becoming sound or healthy again. Now, that to me is a pretty broad definition. So when we think of healing, or at least when I think or thought of healing, it meant, you have an illness or even something physical like a broken arm, and healing means that that arm is not broken anymore. So I think that would be a rather extreme manifestation of healing, albeit our bodies do that on their own, maybe with some medical help or intervention in the process. But those cells of that bone are able to regenerate that bone and make it sound or healthy again. And so when it comes to the idea of healing from something as devastating in our world as cancer, I've always thought and had this inkling in my mind and in my being that it's possible to heal from it. However, that's not generally widely acceptable. And I found that to be true because upon the cancer diagnosis, my natural inclination wasn't, hey, no problem, you can heal from it. It was like, hey, you're going to die, and in the process of the slow death, you're going to be miserable, and they're going to inject you with all sorts of toxins to kill the nasty cells in your body, but we're also going to obliterate really good cells in your body. And if you make it through all that, then hopefully you can live the rest of your life in some form of enjoyment, just hoping that you remain in remission long enough to enjoy the rest of your life. And if you don't and you die, well, you just become a statistic. So that rattling off right there is pretty much the way I was thinking. And again, this is circa 2017. This is before my entry to having horses in my life. So prior to this, I didn't have horses in my life at all. I maybe have spent, I say, like 5 minutes with the horse. Before that, it was probably a little bit longer than that because I did take a ride on a beach in Mexico as a teenager. That was like 45 minutes. And then I remember my aunt and uncle had a horse here and there. I never rode them, but did spend a bit of time with them, minutes here and there on holidays. But realistically, I would probably say I haven't been around a horse prior to 2018 more than about an hour. So uh sheesh. So what I've found, there's just this psychological component to having a cancer diagnosis and living with cancer. And around that time in 2017, and then moving into 2018, Selena and I purchased some land in the country of Southeast Arizona, grassland in the high desert. And we bought 10 acres of grass and dirt, or nothing else on the property. And we decided to proceed and build a house in a homestead or farmstead, if you want to call it that. And So I got a burst of well-being with all of that. There was a lot of change and positivity going on. Now, at the time, I was a tax and financial advisor. That's my background and by education. And I had launched my own practice right around my divorce in 2014 because I had just completed the certified financial planner designation, and I was, gung ho to help people build wealth and establish a strong financial situation for themselves and such and so forth. But as the saying goes, a painter's house is never painted, and, a cobbler doesn't have shoes or something like that. Um, you know, I missed the mark, so to speak, as far as building an uber amount of financial wealth in my life. In fact, my my ex-wife and I, we were on track to be millionaires by our mid 30s at the latest, at the rate we were going when I left the military in 2009. Uh, but as the story goes, my income shifted and my ideas of generating income shifted, and starting a business was a lot like building a house. I thought just because I got education and credentials behind me that having a business with all of that behind me, the heavens would open up and just rain down paying clients. That wasn't the case. It took me a good 4 years because I did try to start out on my own prior to 2014. It really didn't work out, and then relocated across the country back to Arizona and started again in 2014 at a really quite difficult time in my life, all things considered, with the divorce and everything. And at that time, I had started over from scratch financially. The divorce really just, and the years leading up to the divorce, in fact, just really obliterated our savings and everything that we had going. So we didn't have debt other than a home mortgage, but we did have really no cash at that point. Retirement savings was split in half, and that was still kind of locked up in retirement accounts. And other than that, like, our cash savings was pretty much gone. So circa 2014, I was looking at a personal balance sheet that was essentially flat, other than the house. As part of the divorce, I was able to retain the house that we were living in. And so really that was my ticket, if you will, to sell that house and take the equity and go and invest it into the farmstead. And that's exactly what I did. So with the cancer diagnosis, I it sort of lit a fire under me. In my thinking then, I was like, I'm not going to be around long, so there's no sense in trying to build wealth and save, and then get to a point where, financial planners would say, okay, now green light, go. Instead, it felt like if I didn't do something then, I was just going to die, and I was just never going to achieve this goal. So I remember prior to Selena and I getting together that I sat down with an architect and builder, and he said that he would be able to build a house, a small house, mind you, maybe like 500 or 600 square feet with a crew in about 4 to 6 months. And so I took that timeline, and that was my idea, that Selena and I, just us, would be able to build a house in 4 to 6 months. Well, I'm sitting here now in 2023, so it's about 4 years down that line, and just about half of the house is mostly finished. Not fine-tuned finished, but mostly finished. And we probably have a good year worth of work, diligent work, before it's completed, to where we could say, hey, this is a done project. So I was quite a bit naive in that. But that cancer diagnosis really kind of lit the fire for me to go. So I put the house on the market, and that was it. That's the rest is history, as it were. We decided to move and relocate. We wound up purchasing this really shitty old vintage RV from 1987 with the idea that we would renovate it and make it look nice, and that all fell through. We wound up having a storm that came through and blew away a 45-foot long Ramada screen room that we had built. And wow, we just had a lot of depressive moments the first couple years of this process. And reflecting back, there was so much that I wasn't healing, and certainly I don't even think I wanted to heal from cancer or anything else in my life up until that time, or through that time. And then, of course, COVID kicked off, and that was interesting for the whole world. And so now, as I sit here in 2023, and I'm in San Diego, California for the first time. This is my first time being away from home in 4 years. And I'm thinking, how did I get to the point that I am now, where I have actually looked within myself and I can say, Jason, I love you. I love being you. You're an amazing human being, just like every other human being on this earth. And I know that sounds sort of like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, but man, he had a good thing going. He really tried to teach us, that we're perfect, or maybe not perfect, but we're great just the way we are. And it took me 41 years on this earth to really understand that, or to begin to understand that. And so I had an epiphany not long ago that the cancer isn't trying to kill me. It's simply trying to teach me lessons. And the primary lesson that it's trying to teach me is that of love. And regardless of your belief system or religion or what, the nature of who we are on this planet as human beings is love. And without love, we simply don't exist. And to reiterate the cliche, if you can't love yourself, there's absolutely no possible way that you can love somebody else. And there's no way that you can forgive somebody else without loving yourself. It's impossible. And so this all started resonating with me as I continued to meditate, and meditation became a rather simple but profoundly deep process for me. And I feel like this past year I sort of graduated from Headspace and what it was able to offer, and I moved on into, and I don't even really know how I came across it, but the inner engineering program that I mentioned earlier, from Sadhguru. And from that point, just continuing on a daily basis to carry out these practices of what it really comes down to is just sitting silent and letting yourself be without needing to have explanation or analysis about it. And the changes in that have been profound. Now, the horses, in my opinion, help to totally amplify that. So, and what I mean by that, um, they like this, the horses live continually within the spiritual realm. I personally think that they're angelic beings incarnated into the physical manifestation of what we call a horse on this earth. I know you might listen and say, well, that's a little far-fetched. That's fine. You're entitled to that opinion, but I've spent hundreds, if not thousands of hours by now just simply being with horses without any intent of what they do or what I do. And they consistently inform me and remind me that they are mostly spiritual beings. And the more I engage in that direction and I'm open up and vulnerable to them, they become vulnerable to me. And it's been a remarkable process to hear them and feel them in their healing processes. So I'll take Cody for an example. He is my partner and friend in this life. I love him dearly. I love him as if he were a child of mine, unconditionally, if you will. And so he came home to us somewhere in 2019, I think. I'm pretty horrible with dates, so forgive me on that. I think it was somewhere November 2019 that he came home. And I found him on Craigslist of all places, and he was an amazing horse, just right out the gate. But I remember our first ride, he actually laid down, and that was his way of bucking my ass off. He didn't want to ride. He knew I didn't know what to do, and he was really polite about it. But I went through a process with him of the typical, what I guess you would call it, natural horsemanship, applying pressure, bidding him up, round penning, all these sorts of things. And the more I did those things, the more disconnected from him I felt, and the more I felt him shut down. I saw it in his eyes, but I ignored it. I saw it in the way he interacted with me, but I ignored it for the most part. And Alyssa and I have talked about our stories to some degree in this way. And if you've listened to Alyssa's story and even our tribute to Mocha episode, you know that we lost Mocha, our first horse, to an accident that occurred probably between both of them. We think that Cody kicked her or she kicked at the fence. Anyway, she fractured her pelvis and the veterinarian ultimately had to euthanize her. And that was a catalyst for so much change in my life, the life of our horses and Alyssa's life and just our family in general. It was devastating. It was traumatic. But through Mocha's death, we were able to really step back and go within. Or at least I can only speak for myself, but I was able to really go deep within as a result of her death. And I remember a night that I had with Cody. I was out at his pen and he laid down and I was sitting on the ground next to him, and he fell into a deep sleep, and I heard him cry, and I laid flat on the ground, bawling my eyes out over pretty much every bit of pain and suffering and depression and everything that I had going on at the time. And we cried together and we released a lot together. And I remember coming out of that session, if you will, thinking, okay, well, who does that? And I've later come to find out that there's plenty of us out there that have had that experience, and it's a fantastic thing. But I remember sharing it in a Facebook group, and somebody replied back, hey, you may want to listen to this podcast called Journey On with Warwick Schiller. And I started listening to that podcast and started to connect, at least digitally or in my mind, with people who seem to understand this sort of stuff and have similar types of experiences in their life. And the rest has been a really amazing journey. Since that point, it really encouraged me to continue on, to continue with meditation practices, to really continue expanding that and understanding it more and getting more involved in that way. And I would say the last 6 months or so, so somewhere around, November this past year over Thanksgiving, Alyssa took a trip to her mom's, and when she was there, she told me that she wasn't coming back for a while, and that kind of blindsided me. And there's a lot kind of around that discussion, but suffice it to say that I had a lot of inner work still to do, and I still do at this point, but ultimately, we wound up reconnecting through a lot of spiritual processes while she was there. And when she came back, we, together with the horses, experienced some of the most spiritual connectiveness that I have ever experienced in my life. And Alyssa has begun her path of healing for things, most of which I don't know about, but she's working now with professionals to help coach her along and healing processes that she needed to go through. Perhaps it was fractured psychology or whatnot within her about the divorce and other things. We recently read a book called It Didn't Start With You. I think that's the name of it, and the author is not coming to mind right now, but it's basically a psychologist who talks about how traumas and the way they manifest within our mind and body and spirit and such in the present maybe didn't even exist in our present life, and they come from different situations from family members and generations prior to us. So that's a really interesting sort of idea to think about. And ultimately, for us anyway, the horses have been, I want to say, like our personal life coaches, but they also have recognized that they themselves needed and desired their own healing. And so it's like this really cool symbiotic relationship where we just spend time with them and we open up and we become vulnerable with and to them, and they reciprocate always. And in that, we have some of the most magical moments with these horses that honestly I haven't seen very many people get to experience. And the number one is they are restful and at peace. For instance, most every day they'll take at least 3 or 4 naps laying on the ground, full flat on the ground. And it's been my experience that usually if you walk up to a horse who's laying down, they usually pop right up. And in fact, in most cases, and with respect, I haven't been around too many horses in my lifetime, like I mentioned, so I could be wrong on this, but the horses that I have observed at other people's properties and stuff like that over the past half decade or so, they just simply don't really lay down ever, or at least in our presence. And when they do, it's a quick roll, or, it's not a deep meditative cleansing, healing sleep. And when they experience that and you are in their presence when they both go to sleep and wake up, there's this sharing of spiritual edification that happens. Now, you could disagree, or many people probably will say that's too woo woo. I can only speak from my experience of the profound feeling of healing and connectedness, not only with myself and my family members, but also the earth and the love that's within all of us. And so, I don't know, it's just been an amazing process. All of that to say that I feel really strongly right now within me that the world needs healing, and not just a healing on like a medical or physical level, but really at spiritual level. And it seems like we are so fractured, and I can understand and empathize with it. Like, in the years past, just walking around, if like, for instance, like right now I'm in another city that I don't live in, and I would usually be really keep to myself and not try to interact with anybody in these types of situations, and like walking down the street, like not giving eye contact or anything with anybody. And that's changed within me to where I have actually developed, or allowed to develop, a sense of love and compassion for people, to where I'm more interested in just people in general, which seems really out of character for me to even say that, but it's so true right now. And less, or yeah, less judgment overall. So, and just seeing people for who they are, and we're all human beings, regardless of race, religion, belief systems, or even problems or mistakes that we've made in the past. We're all human beings living on this planet in the present. And it seems like we interact with each other in a way that shuts us down. It's real similar to the way that we as humans interact with horses largely. We shut them down. We don't acknowledge that they have feelings. That big word anthropomorphism is shunned upon even still, and it's 2023. I think it was on Warwick Schiller's podcast where he talked about the scientific community got together like in the 90s to establish that animals had feelings. In the 90s, like, the entire existence of humanity existed up until the 90s before collectively anybody got together to say that animals have feelings. Man, so I just feel like as human beings, we need healing, and healing means that we become sound or healthy again. And we're not going to be able to do that by continuing to walk around with our inflated egos that exist only to help us survive. Like, we have survival methods now that our ancestors didn't have. And so to me, it's like we need to get to a collective letting go of our egoistic or egoic mentality and to soften to one another, regardless of what our belief systems are. Because at the end of the day, none of us really truly know. And we have to be comfortable with the fact that we don't know and that we're all collectively in this together. I think I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much for listening, and this is just my personal story. I appreciate you and hope you have a great day and enjoy your horses.